I stumbled out of the hospital at 6 in the morning, my scrubs soaked with sweat and coffee stains, after pulling a brutal 14-hour overnight shift in the emergency room. My feet ached, my back screamed, and all I wanted was to collapse into my car seat and drive home to my tiny apartment. But when I reached the parking spot where I had left my Honda Civic 12 hours earlier, all I found was empty asphalt and a growing pit of panic in my stomach. My car was gone. Standing there in the hospital parking lot, I felt my world tilt sideways. The morning sun was already getting hot, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the early hour. I spun around, looking at every car in the lot, hoping I had just forgotten where I parked. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on my mind. Maybe I had parked in a different section after working back-to-back shifts for the past 3 days. But no, the empty space mocked me. My reliable 8-year-old Honda Civic with its slightly dented bumper and faded paint was nowhere to be found. The same car I had saved every penny to buy during my second year of medical school. The car that had never let me down, that got me through countless late-night study sessions, clinical rotations, and now my residency at the hospital. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone to call 911. This had to be theft. Who else would take my beat-up Honda when there were BMWs and Mercedes sitting right there in the same lot? My mind raced through the implications. I needed that car to get to work, to get to the grocery store, to get anywhere in this sprawling Texas city where public transportation was practically non-existent. As I started to dial, I noticed 3 missed calls from my mother. The calls had come in around 2 in the morning, right when I was dealing with a cardiac arrest in the ER. I had been too busy trying to save someone's life to answer my phone. Something cold settled in my stomach as I pressed play on the voicemail. "Hi, honey, it's Mom." Her voice was cheerful, almost sing-song, the way it got when she was trying to deliver bad news like it was good news. "Listen, don't be mad, but Jake needed a ride to the lake house with his friends for the weekend, and your father thought it would be okay to let him borrow your car. You were at work anyway, and we figured you wouldn't need it until tomorrow. He promises to bring it back by Sunday, maybe Monday at the latest. You know how these trips go. Anyway, call me when you get this. Love you." I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, as the message ended. The parking lot seemed to spin around me. My own family had taken my car without asking. Not stolen by some random criminal, but taken by my 22-year-old brother Jake, who had dropped out of college twice and spent most of his time playing video games in our parents' basement. The same Jake who had wrecked his own car 6 months ago by driving it into a ditch while texting. The same Jake who had never held a steady job for more than 3 weeks. The same Jake who our parents still treated like he was 15 years old instead of a grown man who should have been taking responsibility for his own life. I thought about the hundreds of hours I had worked to save up the $12,000 to buy that car in cash. No loans, no help from family, no debt hanging over my head. I had eaten ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches for months to make it happen. I had worked extra shifts at the campus clinic during medical school, had sold plasma twice a week, had lived in the cheapest apartment I could find just so I could have reliable transportation. My fingers trembling with rage, I called my mother back. It went straight to voicemail. I tried my father, same thing. Of course they would turn off their phones after pulling something like this. I called Jake's number, but it was disconnected. Apparently, he had forgotten to pay his phone bill again, which was probably why my parents had to coordinate this whole thing through their phones instead of him asking me directly. Not that he would have asked. Jake had never asked for anything in his life. He just expected it to be given to him, and our parents had spent the last 22 years making sure that expectation was met. I stood there in that parking lot, still wearing my wrinkled scrubs, and felt something crack inside my chest. This was not just about a car. This was about years of being the responsible one, the one who worked hard, the one who made sacrifices, while Jake got everything handed to him without consequence. The Uber I had to call cost me $43. $43 I had budgeted for groceries that week. As I sat in the back seat of a stranger's car, watching the city pass by through windows that should have been my own, I felt the first real stirring of something I had never allowed myself to feel toward my family before. Pure, undiluted anger. I made it to my apartment and tried to sleep, but my mind would not shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that empty parking space. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a call or text from Jake or my parents with an apology, or at least an explanation of when I could expect my car back. Nothing. Around noon, I was lying on my couch, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how I was going to get to work for my next shift in 6 hours, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Probably a telemarketer, but I was desperate for any distraction from the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. Hello, is this Liam Peterson? Yes, this is Liam. This is Officer Martinez with the Texas Highway Patrol. I'm calling about an incident involving your vehicle, a 2016 Honda Civic. License plate number. The world stopped. Officer Martinez kept talking, but his words seemed to come from very far away. Incident. My vehicle. I managed to force words out of my mouth. What kind of incident? Is everyone okay? Sir, there was a single vehicle accident this morning around 10:30 a.m. on Highway 12, about 15 miles outside of town. The driver lost control at high speed and struck a tree. The vehicle is a total loss, but the driver sustained only minor injuries and was transported to Cedar Creek Medical Center. Total loss. The words echoed in my head like a bell tolling. My car, my reliable, dependable car that had never given me a moment of trouble, was destroyed. The driver, I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. Was his name Jake Peterson? Yes, sir. That's correct. Now, we need you to come down to the station to fill out some paperwork regarding the incident. There are also some issues we need to discuss about insurance coverage and property damage. Property damage. Insurance coverage. I felt like I was drowning. Officer Martinez, can you tell me what happened? How fast was he going? There was a pause. Sir, according to our investigation, the vehicle was traveling at approximately 90 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone. Skid marks indicate the driver lost control while attempting to take a curve. There's also evidence that this may have been part of some kind of racing incident. 90 miles per hour. Racing. I closed my eyes and felt the last piece of my childhood faith in my family crumble into dust. I threw on clean clothes and called another Uber to Cedar Creek Medical Center. During the 20-minute ride, I tried calling my parents again. Still no answer. I left voicemails on both their phones, explaining what the police had told me and demanding they call me back immediately. Walking into the hospital where Jake was being treated felt surreal. I had spent so much of my life in hospitals, but always as the one trying to help people, not as the family member of someone who had just destroyed my life through pure recklessness. I found Jake in the emergency department, sitting up in bed with a bandage on his forehead and his arm in a sling. His 3 best friends were there with him, Tommy, Brandon, and Derek, all of whom I recognized as the same group of guys who had been getting into trouble together since high school. The first thing I heard when I walked into the room was Jake laughing. Dude, you should have seen it, he was saying to Tommy. I was doing like 95, and this curve came out of nowhere. The car just flew off the road like something out of a movie. I'm lucky to be alive, he was bragging. My brother had just totaled my car and was bragging about it like it was some kind of achievement. Jake. He looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. For just a second, something that might have been shame flashed across his face. Then his usual cocky grin took its place. Hey, Liam, Mom said she called you. Don't worry, man. It's not as bad as it looks. Not as bad as it looks. I stepped into the room, and his friend suddenly found the floor very interesting. Jake, the police just told me my car is completely destroyed. Total loss. They said you were going 90 miles per hour. Come on, it wasn't 90. Maybe 85. Tops. He shrugged like we were discussing the weather. And anyway, Brandon was right behind me in his Mustang, so it's not like I was the only one driving fast. We were just having some fun. Fun. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. You were racing. We weren't racing. We were just seeing who could make better time to the lake house. It's not like there was any traffic on that road. I looked at his friends, searching for any sign that one of them understood the gravity of what had happened. Tommy looked uncomfortable, but Brandon and Derek were nodding along with Jake's explanation like it made perfect sense. Jake, that car was my only way to get to work. I saved for 2 years to buy it. I don't have money for another one. Relax, dude. That's what insurance is for. Do you have insurance, Jake? The question seemed to catch him off guard. I mean, him covered under Mom and Dad's policy. For my car, well, I figured it would work the same way. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Jake, you're not on my insurance policy. You can't just be covered by someone else's insurance when you're driving a car that doesn't belong to you. The cocky expression finally started to slip from his face. Are you serious? Dead serious. Which means I'm liable for all the damage you just caused. The car, the tree, whatever else you hit, all of it comes back to me. Jake looked at his friends, then back at me. For the first time since I had walked into the room, he seemed to understand that this was not just some funny story he would be telling for the next few months. Look, Liam, I'm sure Mom and Dad will figure something out. They always do. That was the moment I realized that my brother had never, in his entire life, faced a real consequence for his actions. Every mistake, every bad decision, every moment of recklessness had been smoothed over by our parents. He genuinely believed that this would be no different. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. On our way to the hospital. Don't say anything to upset Jake until we get there. Do not say anything to upset Jake. I looked at my brother, sitting in that hospital bed without a care in the world, and felt 27 years of being the responsible one crystallize into something hard and sharp in my chest. This time was going to be different. My parents arrived an hour later in a whirlwind of concern and fussing. My mother immediately rushed to Jake's bedside, smoothing his hair and asking if he needed anything. My father shook hands with Jake's friends and started asking about the accident like it was some unavoidable natural disaster instead of the result of pure recklessness. Nobody asked how I was doing. Thank goodness you're okay, sweetheart, my mother said, adjusting Jake's pillows. When we got the call, I thought, I'm fine, Mom. Barely a scratch. Jake was eating up the attention, playing up his minor injuries like he had just survived a plane crash. My father turned to me. Liam, we need to talk about this situation. Why don't we go to the family conference room down the hall? Actually, Dad, I think we should talk right here. Jake needs to be part of this conversation since he's the one who destroyed my car. My father's face tightened. He had never liked it when I challenged him, even as an adult. Son, let's keep things civil. This is already a difficult situation. Civil. I could feel my voice rising. Dad, you gave away my car without asking me. Jake totaled it going 90 miles per hour. There's nothing civil about any of this. It was an accident, my mother said quickly. These things happen. Mom, racing on a public highway is not an accident. It's a choice. We weren't racing, Jake said from the bed. I told you we were just driving fast, at 90 miles per hour, in a 55 zone. My father held up his hands. Look, everyone needs to calm down. We're a family, and we'll work through this together. The important thing is that Jake is safe. I stared at him. What about my car, Dad? What about the fact that I have no way to get to work? What about the property damage that I'm now liable for because Jake has no insurance? Well, figure something out, he said dismissively. Maybe it's time you looked into getting a newer car anyway. That Honda was getting pretty old. Like it was some piece of junk I should be grateful to be rid of, instead of a car I had worked myself nearly to death to afford. I liked my car, I said quietly. I bought it myself. It was reliable. It was paid for. And now it's gone because you decided to lend it to someone without asking me. My father's face reddened. Liam, your brother needed transportation. You were at work and wouldn't have needed the car until today anyway. That's not the point. You don't get to make decisions about my property. Your property, my mother repeated, and there was something cold in her voice. Liam, you're talking like we're strangers instead of family. Family helps each other out. Family asks before taking someone's car, Mom. Oh, please, Jake said from the bed. It's just a car. Why are you being so dramatic about this? Just a car. I looked around the room at the 4 most important people in my life and realized that not one of them understood what they had taken from me. Not just the car, but the security, the independence, the 2 years of sacrifice that car represented. Jake, what's your plan for paying for the damage? He shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. File an insurance claim. You don't have insurance for my car. Then file it under your insurance. My insurance doesn't cover other drivers, especially drivers who aren't supposed to be using my car in the first place. My father stepped forward. Liam, well, work with the insurance companies. These things can be complicated, but there are always solutions. What if they're errant? What if I'm stuck paying for all of this myself? Then, well, help you, my mother said. We're not going to let you go through this alone. How? Are you going to buy me a new car? My parents exchanged glances. Well, my father said slowly, we don't exactly have that kind of money just lying around. But we can probably help with payments or something. Help with payments. I thought about my medical school loans, my rent, my groceries that I was already stretching to afford on a resident's salary. I thought about taking on a car payment because my brother decided to play race car driver with my property. This is unbelievable, I said. You take my car, Jake destroys it. And now I'm supposed to be grateful that you might help me go into debt to replace it. Nobody said you should be grateful. My father snapped. But you could show a little more concern for your brother's well-being instead of worrying about material things. Material things. My car, my financial security, my ability to get to work and make a living were just material things. That's when my phone buzzed with a group text message. It was from my mother, sent to me. My father and Jake were a family. Well, get through this together. I looked at the message, then at my family. My parents were looking at me expectantly, like I was supposed to respond with something supportive and understanding. Jake was smirking, probably thinking this whole thing would blow over like it always did. I typed back 2 words. Not anymore. My mother looked at her phone, then at me. Liam, what is that supposed to mean? It means, I'm done. I'm done being the responsible one, while Jake gets away with everything. I'm done having my life disrupted because you 2 refuse to let him face consequences for his actions. Liam, my father said in his stern, parental voice. You're being childish. Childish? Dad? I'm 27 years old. I'm a medical resident trying to build a career and a life. Jake is 22 and has never held a real job or taken responsibility for anything in his life. Which one of us is being childish? Your brother has been through a traumatic experience today, my mother said. He could have been killed in that accident. It wasn't an accident, Mom. It was the inevitable result of years of you and Dad teaching him that his actions don't have consequences. Jake sat up straighter in the bed. Hey, Nobody asked for your opinion about my life. Nobody asked for your opinion about my car either, but that didn't stop you from totaling it. Boys, my father said sharply, that's enough. We're in a hospital. I looked around the room one more time. At Jake, still defiant even from a hospital bed. At my parents, more concerned with protecting their precious baby than with the damage he had caused. At the friends who had been encouraging this reckless behavior and would probably continue to do so. You know what? You're right, Dad. We are in a hospital, and I don't want to cause a scene here. But I want you all to understand something. I'm not paying for any of this. I'm not helping clean up Jake's mess. And I'm not pretending this is okay because we share DNA. I turned toward the door, then stopped. And Jake, the next time you need a ride somewhere, call an Uber. As I walked out of that hospital room, I heard my mother calling after me. But for the first time in my life, I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I didn't apologize for standing up for myself. I kept walking. The next morning, I met with my insurance agent, Sandra Walsh, in her small office downtown. I had taken another expensive Uber ride, and the cost was starting to add up in ways that made my stomach hurt. Sandra was a middle-aged woman who had been handling my car insurance for 3 years. She had always been straightforward with me, which I appreciated. Today, her expression was particularly serious. Liam, I've reviewed your policy and the police report from the accident. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. I had been expecting this, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the gut. Your policy specifically excludes coverage for drivers who are not listed on the policy and do not have your explicit permission to use the vehicle. Since your brother was not authorized to drive your car, we cannot cover the damage to the vehicle or any liability claims that might arise. What kind of liability claims? Sandra pulled out a folder and spread several documents across her desk. Well, there's the tree that was damaged, which belongs to the county. There's also significant damage to underground utility lines that your brother's vehicle severed when it left the roadway. The utility company has already filed a claim. She pointed to a document with numbers that made my vision blur. The current estimate for property damage is just over $21,000. That doesn't include the value of your vehicle, which we estimated at about $8,000. $21,000. I made $35,000 a year as a medical resident. After taxes, student loan payments, rent, and basic living expenses, I barely had $500 left each month. Sandra, there has to be something we can do. Some kind of appeal process or... I'm sorry, Liam. I've been in this business for 15 years, and I've seen situations like this before. The policy language is very clear. If we started covering unauthorized drivers, it would be impossible to assess risk properly. I sat back in the uncomfortable chair and tried to process what she was telling me. Not only had I lost my car, but I was now facing a debt that would take me years to pay off. What happens if I can't pay? The utility company and the county will likely pursue collection through the courts. They could garnish your wages, place liens on any property you own, and it will severely damage your credit score. My credit score. I thought about how that would affect my ability to rent apartments, get loans, maybe even future employment. Some medical institutions ran credit checks on their residents. There is one possibility, Sandra said carefully. If you can prove that your brother was under the influence of alcohol or drugs at the time of the accident, it might be considered a criminal act, which could change how the insurance companies handle the claims. Was he tested? According to the police report, he was. His blood alcohol level was 0.06, which is below the legal limit but indicates he had been drinking. I left Sandra's office feeling like I was walking underwater. Everything seemed distorted and far away. I called my supervisor at the hospital and explained that I was dealing with a family emergency and might need to adjust my schedule to handle legal issues. Dr. Patricia Chen was understanding but concerned. "Liam, I hope you know that personal issues can't interfere with patient care. If you need time off to handle this situation, we can arrange that. But you'll need to use your vacation days." Vacation days I had been saving to visit my college roommate's wedding in California. More plans dissolving because of Jake's recklessness. Over the next few days, I tried repeatedly to reach my parents. They had turned their phones back on, but they weren't returning my calls. When I finally got my mother on the phone, her tone was cold. "Liam, I don't understand why you're making this so complicated. Jake made a mistake, but that's what families do. They support each other through difficult times. Mom, I'm facing $21,000 in debt because of Jake's mistake. How exactly are you and Dad planning to support me through this?" "Well, we can probably help with some of the payments, maybe $50 a month or something." $50 a month. At that rate, it would take me 35 years to pay off Jake's damage. What about Jake? Is he contributing anything? "Liam, your brother is going through a very difficult time right now. Has emotionally fragile from the accident. His therapist says that putting too much pressure on him could cause a setback." His therapist. Jake had been seeing a therapist on and off since high school, whenever his behavior got bad enough that the school threatened consequences. Somehow, therapy always became another excuse for why Jake couldn't be held accountable for his actions. "Mom, Jake wasn't emotionally fragile when he was going 90 miles per hour in my car." "That's a very hurtful thing to say, Liam. I thought we raised you to be more compassionate than that." "More compassionate. I was working 14-hour shifts trying to save people's lives, and I was the one who needed to be more compassionate. I started getting calls from the utility company and the county's legal department, professional, polite calls explaining my liability and their expectations for payment. I had to hire an attorney, which cost me another $1,500 I didn't have. My lawyer, David Martinez, was a calm, experienced man who specialized in personal injury and liability cases. He reviewed all the documents and gave me his assessment. "Liam, the reality is that you're legally responsible for this debt. However, there may be some opportunities to pursue your brother for reimbursement through civil court. Would that actually work? Probably not. If your brother has no assets and no steady income, winning a judgment against him doesn't really help you. You can't get blood from a stone." That evening, I was sitting in my apartment, eating a peanut butter sandwich for dinner because I couldn't afford groceries, when my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Jake had posted a video. In the video, he was laughing with his friends, apparently at some kind of party. The caption read, "Epic weekend at the lake house. Almost didn't make it back alive, LOL. Sometimes you gotta live life on the edge." He had turned my financial ruin into a funny story for social media. I screenshot the video and sent it to my lawyer. If Jake wanted to treat this like a joke, maybe it was time to see how funny he found a courtroom. David Martinez called me 3 days later with news that changed everything. "Liam, I've been investigating your brother's accident more thoroughly, and I've found some things I think you need to know about." I was sitting in the hospital break room during a short break between patients, exhausted and running on my 4th cup of coffee that day. What kind of things? Well, first, I pulled the complete police report, including witness statements. There were 2 other people who saw the accident, and their accounts are different from what your brother told the police. David paused, and I could hear papers rustling on his end. According to these witnesses, your brother and his friend Brandon were definitely racing, not just driving fast, but actively trying to outrun each other. One witness said they saw the 2 cars speeding for about 5 miles before the crash, with your brother passing Brandon multiple times. My stomach clenched. What else? I also requested the security footage from a gas station about 10 miles from the crash site. The timestamp shows your brother and his friends stopped there about 2 hours before the accident. In the video, you can clearly see them drinking beer in the parking lot, but his blood alcohol was below the legal limit. Yes, but that doesn't mean he wasn't impaired. And more importantly, the video shows your brother texting while he's drinking. I had the cell phone records pulled, and guess what? He sent 3 text messages within 5 minutes of the crash, texting while driving 90 miles per hour. I felt sick. David, if Jake was texting and drinking and racing, doesn't that change the insurance situation? It might. Reckless driving, especially with evidence of racing and distracted driving, could potentially void the policy exclusions. But there's something else you need to know. I waited, not sure I wanted to hear what came next. I did some digging into your brother's history. Liam, this isn't his first accident. Has had 2 previous incidents that were apparently handled quietly by your parents. What do you mean? 2 years ago, he rear-ended someone at a red light while texting. Your parents paid the damages out of pocket to avoid an insurance claim. Last year, he sideswiped a parked car outside a bar and left the scene. The owner tracked him down through his license plate. And again, your parents paid for the repairs. I sat there in the break room, trying to process this information. My parents had been covering up Jake's reckless driving for years. They had been enabling him to become a danger to himself and everyone else on the road. There's one more thing, David said. I found the bank records for the payments your parents made for those previous accidents. Do you remember having a college fund that your parents were supposed to be saving for your medical school expenses? Yeah, they told me they had to use it for some kind of financial emergency a few years ago. Why? The dates match up, Liam. Your parents used money from your college fund to pay for Jake's previous accidents. About $12,000 total. The phone slipped in my hand. $12,000. Money that was supposed to help me pay off my student loans. Money I had assumed was lost to some family financial crisis, had actually been spent cleaning up Jake's messes. Are you absolutely sure about this? The bank records are clear. Withdrawals from an education savings account in your name, with checks written to auto body shops and insurance companies for damages caused by Jake. I ended the call and sat there in the empty break room, staring at my reflection in the black screen of my phone. My parents had stolen from me to enable my brother. They had looked me in the eye and lied about why my college fund was gone. They had let me struggle with student loan debt while secretly funding Jake's irresponsible behavior. That evening, I drove my rental car to my parents' house. I had been putting off this confrontation for days, but David's investigation had given me the ammunition I needed. My mother answered the door and immediately tried to hug me. I stepped back. Mom, we need to talk. All of us. Is Dad here? Yes, but Liam, if you're here to yell at us about the car again. It's not about the car anymore, Mom. It's about a lot more than that. We sat in the living room where I had grown up, where I had done homework at the coffee table and watched Saturday morning cartoons with Jake when we were kids. The familiarity of it made what I had to say even more painful. I hired a lawyer, I said without preamble. My father's face darkened. Liam, that was unnecessary. This is a family matter. No, Dad, it's a legal matter. And my lawyer found some very interesting information about Jake's driving history. I pulled out the folder David had given me and spread the documents across the coffee table. Bank records, police reports, witness statements, security footage stills. Jake has been in 3 accidents in 2 years. You've been covering them up and paying for the damage, and you used my college fund to do it. The silence in the room was deafening. My mother looked at the bank records, and I watched the color drain from her face. Liam, my father said slowly, we can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you lied to me about where my college money went? Can you explain why you've been enabling Jake to be a danger to innocent people? Can you explain why you thought it was okay to steal from one son to protect the other? My mother started crying. We were trying to protect both of you. If Jake had gotten in trouble with the law, it would have ruined his future. What future, Mom? He doesn't have a job. Has dropped out of college twice. He has no direction and no sense of responsibility. You haven't protected his future. You've guaranteed that he doesn't have one. My father stood up, his face red with anger. Don't you dare lecture us about parenting. Liam, we did the best we could with a difficult situation. The best you could, Dad. You created this situation. Every time you bailed Jake out, you taught him that his actions don't have consequences. And now he's totaled my car and left me with $21,000 in debt. And you're still more worried about protecting him than fixing what he's done. We told you we'd help with payments, my mother said through her tears. $50 a month, Mom, while Jake posts videos on social media joking about the crash. They both looked genuinely surprised by this. I pulled out my phone and showed them Jake's Instagram video. He thinks this is funny. He thinks almost killing himself and destroying my financial security is content for social media. Does that sound like someone who's emotionally fragile and needs protection? My father sat back down heavily. For the first time since I had arrived, neither of them had a ready excuse or explanation. What do you want from us, Liam? I want you to stop enabling him. I want you to make this right. And I want you to tell me the truth about everything else you've been covering up. My mother and father exchanged a long look. Finally, my mother spoke. There might be more, she said quietly. We took out a second mortgage on the house last year. Some of it was for home improvements, but some of it was for Jake's expenses, a second mortgage. My parents had put their retirement at risk to fund my brother's irresponsible lifestyle. How much? $40,000. I felt like the room was spinning. This was so much worse than I had imagined. Mom, Dad, you've got to see what you've done. You've enabled Jake to the point where he's literally dangerous. You've compromised your own financial security. You've stolen from me. And you've taught him that there's no problem so big that Mom and Dad won't fix it for him. So what are you saying? My father asked. I'm saying it stops now. Jake faces the consequences for this accident. He pays for the damages he caused. He gets a job and starts taking responsibility for his life. And you stop bailing him out. And if we don't, I looked at my parents, these people who had raised me and loved me and somehow lost their way so completely in their desire to protect Jake. Then I'm done. No more family dinners, no more holidays, no more pretending that this dysfunction is normal. I won't watch you destroy yourselves to enable him, and I won't let you drag me down with you. My mother was crying harder now. Liam, you can't mean that. I mean every word of it, Mom. I love you both, but I love myself too. And I'm not going to sacrifice my life and my future for Jake's problems anymore. I gathered up my documents and headed for the door. As I was leaving, my father called after me. What if he can't handle it? What if he breaks down? I turned back to look at them. Then maybe hell finally learn that actions have consequences. And maybe hell become the kind of man you should have raised him to be in the first place. 2 days later, my lawyer called with an update that made my blood run cold. Liam, I've been working with a private investigator to get more details about your brother's accident. We've uncovered something that I think constitutes fraud. I was at the hospital, just finishing up a particularly difficult shift. A construction worker had come in with a severe head injury, and we had worked for hours to stabilize him. The last thing I needed was more bad news about Jake. What kind of fraud? Your brother's friend Brandon gave a statement to police that was completely different from what the witnesses saw. He claimed that Jake swerved to avoid a deer, that it was unavoidable. But the physical evidence and witness accounts show that's impossible. David paused. and I could hear him typing on his computer. More importantly, I found financial records showing that your parents wrote Brandon a check for $5,000 3 days after the accident. The memo line says car repair, but Brandon's car wasn't damaged in the incident. $5,000 to lie to the police. My parents had committed obstruction of justice to protect Jake. David, what does this mean legally? It means your brother could face criminal charges for reckless driving and racing. It means your parents could face charges for obstruction of justice. And it means we have a much stronger case for recovering damages. What should I do? That's up to you, Liam. We can turn this evidence over to the district attorney and let them decide whether to press charges. Or you can use it as leverage to force your family to make this right. I thought about my parents facing criminal charges. I thought about Jake potentially going to jail. As angry as I was, the idea of my family being prosecuted made me feel sick. Give me 24 hours to talk to them first. That evening, I drove to my parents' house again. This time, I called ahead and told them I was coming and that Jake needed to be there too. Jake was sitting on the couch playing video games when I walked in, wearing the same clothes he had been wearing in his social media posts from the weekend. He barely looked up when I entered the room. Jake, turn that off. We need to talk. I'm in the middle of a game, he said, without looking away from the screen. I walked over and unplugged the console. What the hell, Liam? Jake, you're going to sit there and listen to what I have to say, and you're going to do it without interrupting, without making excuses, and without acting like this is all some big joke. My parents sat down on the opposite couch. My mother looked like she had been crying for days. I pulled out a new folder of documents that David had given me and spread them across the coffee table. Jake, you lied to the police about what happened during the accident. You told them you swerved to avoid a deer, but there was no deer. You were racing, Brandon. You were texting while driving, and you had been drinking. Jake started to speak, but I held up my hand. I have witness statements, security footage, cell phone records, and bank records showing that Mom and Dad paid Brandon $5,000 to back up your lie. The room went completely silent. Jake's face had gone pale, and for the first time since the accident, he looked genuinely scared. What you did, Jake, was criminal. Racing, reckless driving, distracted driving, lying to police investigators. What Mom and Dad did was obstruction of justice. All of you could face serious criminal charges. My father found his voice first. Liam, what are you saying? I'm saying that my lawyer has compiled enough evidence to put Jake in jail and both of you in serious legal trouble. The question is, what happens next? I sat down across from them and looked each of them in the eye. Here is what's going to happen. Jake is going to get a job, a real job, and he's going to start paying me back for the damages he caused. Not $50 a month, real payments based on a real income. I can't get a job, Jake said quickly. I'm still recovering from the accident, my doctor said. Your doctor said you have a mild concussion that should clear up in a few weeks. You're not disabled, Jake. You're unemployed because you choose to be. I turned to my parents. Mom, Dad, you're going to pay back the money you stole from my college fund, with interest, and you're going to stop enabling Jake's behavior completely. No more bailouts, no more excuses, no more covering up his mistakes. And if we don't agree, my father asked, then I turn all of this evidence over to the district attorney tomorrow morning and let them decide what to do with it. My mother started crying again. Liam, we're your family. How can you threaten us like this? The same way you could steal from me to protect Jake. The same way you could look me in the eye and lie about where my college money went. The same way you could let me take on $21,000 in debt for something I didn't do. Jake suddenly stood up from the couch. This is bullshit. You're trying to destroy our family over a stupid car. Sit down, Jake. No. I'm sick of you acting like you're better than everyone else just because you're a doctor. Newsflash, Liam. Nobody cares how hard you work or how responsible you are. Life happens, and sometimes people make mistakes. Mistakes. I stood up too, and Jake took a step back. Jake, you've made the same mistake 3 times. You've cost our parents thousands of dollars. You've put innocent people at risk. You've stolen money that was meant for my education. This isn't a mistake. This is a pattern of selfish, reckless behavior that Mom and Dad have been enabling for years. I never asked them to pay for anything. You never had to ask. You just did whatever you wanted, knowing they would clean up after you. Jake's face was red now, and I could see tears of frustration in his eyes. Maybe I wouldn't act out so much if I didn't have a perfect older brother who makes me look like garbage all the time. There it was. The truth I had suspected for years, but never wanted to admit. So this is about jealousy? You totaled my car because you're jealous of me. You want to know the truth, Jake was shouting now. Yeah, I drove fast on purpose. I wanted to see how fast your stupid car could go. I wanted to do something that mattered, that people would remember, instead of just being the screw-up little brother who never does anything right. The room fell completely silent. Jake had just admitted that he had crashed my car intentionally. My parents were staring at him in shock. Finally, they were seeing their youngest son for who he really was. Jake, my mother whispered, you could have been killed. So what? At least people would have cared about me for 5 minutes instead of always talking about how wonderful Liam is. That's when someone started knocking on the front door. Loud, aggressive knocking. My father went to answer it, and I heard him talking to someone in a stern voice. A moment later, he came back into the living room, followed by 2 police officers. Mr. Peterson, one of the officers said, looking at Jake, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of reckless driving, racing on a public highway, and filing a false police report. Jake looked at me with panic in his eyes. Liam, you said you'd give us 24 hours. I didn't call them. Jake, the officer continued. We also have warrants for Thomas and Patricia Peterson on charges of obstruction of justice and conspiracy to file a false police report. My parents. They were going to arrest my parents. Wait, I said to the officers. Is there any way we can resolve this without arrests? These people are willing to cooperate and make restitution. The lead officer looked at me with some sympathy. Son, are you the victim in this case? Yes, sir. Then, ultimately, it's up to the district attorney whether to pursue charges. But given the evidence we've seen, including the payment to the witness who lied to investigators, this is being treated as a serious criminal matter. They handcuffed Jake first. As they led him toward the door, he turned back to look at me. I'm sorry, Liam. I'm really sorry. For the first time since the accident, he actually sounded like he meant it. They handcuffed my parents next. My mother was crying, and my father looked like he had aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. Well, call you from the station, my father said as they led him away. And then I was alone in my childhood home, surrounded by the evidence of my family's dysfunction, wondering if I had just destroyed the people I loved in order to save myself. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life. Jake, my mother, and my father spent 2 nights in county jail before their bail hearings. I used money from my emergency savings to post bail for my parents, but I left Jake in jail. It was time for him to face consequences without anyone swooping in to rescue him. The district attorney, Margaret Rodriguez, called me on Tuesday morning. Mr. Peterson, I've reviewed the case against your family members. Given the evidence and the cooperation we've received from your attorney, I'm prepared to offer a plea agreement. What kind of agreement? Your brother pleads guilty to reckless driving and filing a false police report. He serves 6 months in county jail, pays full restitution for the damages he caused, and completes 2 years of court-supervised community service. Your parents plead guilty to obstruction of justice, pay a fine of $10,000, and complete 100 hours of community service each. 6 months in jail for Jake. It was more accountability than he had ever faced in his life. What about the restitution? Jake doesn't have any money. That's his problem to figure out, Mr. Peterson. The court will garnish his wages once he finds employment. If he chooses not to work, he'll stay in jail until the debt is paid. I thought about this. For the first time in his life, Jake would have to choose between work and consequences. There would be no bailout, no escape clause. He'll need to discuss this with my family. You have 48 hours to let me know. I drove to the county jail that afternoon to see Jake. He looked terrible. His hair was disheveled. He had dark circles under his eyes, and the cocky attitude that had defined him for so long was completely gone. "Liam," he said when they brought him to the visiting room, "thank you for coming. Jake, the DA offered you a plea deal. 6 months in jail, full restitution, and 2 years of community service." His face crumpled. 6 months? Liam, I can't survive 6 months in here. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to race my car at 90 miles per hour. I know I screwed up, but please, there has to be another way. I looked at my little brother, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years, without the protection of our parents, without the safety net he had always taken for granted. He looked young and scared and completely lost. Jake, there is another way. You can choose to take responsibility for what you've done. You can choose to get a job and start paying for the damage you caused. You can choose to grow up. How? I don't know how to do any of that stuff. I've never had to. That's exactly the problem. Mom and Dad never made you learn. But it's not too late. I spent an hour with Jake, explaining the plea agreement and what it would mean. For the first time in our adult lives, we had a real conversation about his choices and their consequences. "If I take the deal," he said finally, "will you help me figure out how to get a job when I get out?" Jake, he'll help you with anything, as long as you're genuinely committed to changing your life. He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I want to change, Liam. I'm tired of being the screw-up. I'm tired of disappointing everyone, including myself." I met with my parents the next day. They had aged years in just a few days. The reality of potentially facing criminal prosecution had shattered their illusions about the situation they had created. "We've been talking," my mother said, "about everything you said, about how we've handled things with Jake. We know we made mistakes," my father added. "We thought we were protecting him, but we see now that we were just making everything worse." I pulled out a notebook where I had written down everything that needed to happen for our family to heal. "If you want to make this right, here's what needs to happen. You take the plea deal. You pay the fine and do the community service. You pay back my college fund with interest. You attend family counseling to understand why you enabled Jake's behavior. And you stop giving Jake money or bailing him out of problems, ever." My mother nodded. "What about the restitution Jake owes you?" "Jake pays that himself, with money he earns from a real job. If it takes him 5 years, so be it. The point is that he pays it. And if we agree to all of this, then we rebuild our family relationships on a foundation of honesty and accountability, instead of enabling and denial." My parents looked at each other and nodded. "Well, do it," my father said. "All of it." The plea hearings took place the following week. Jake stood before the judge and accepted responsibility for his actions. The judge, an older woman who had clearly seen plenty of cases like this, looked at him sternly. "Mr. Peterson, you're 22 years old enough to understand that driving 90 miles per hour while texting could have killed innocent people. You're fortunate that the only damage was property damage and not loss of life." "Yes, Your Honor," Jake said quietly. "I'm sentencing you to 6 months in county jail, to be followed by 2 years of supervised community service. You will also pay full restitution to your brother for the damages you caused. Do you understand these terms? Yes, Your Honor. My parents' hearing was shorter. They pleaded guilty, were sentenced to community service and fines, and were released on probation. Jake spent his 6 months in jail, and during that time, something changed in him. He wrote me letters every week, talking about the anger management classes he was taking and the job training programs available to inmates. For the first time in his life, he had time to think about his choices without distractions. When he was released, he moved into a halfway house and got a job at a construction company. The work was hard, but he stuck with it. He started making payments on his debt to me, $50 a week, which was all he could afford after his basic living expenses. My parents enrolled in family counseling and started attending meetings for families of people with addiction and behavioral problems. They learned about enabling behaviors and began to understand how their desire to protect Jake had actually hurt him. The community service requirements turned out to be a blessing in disguise. My parents were assigned to help at a homeless shelter, where they met other families struggling with adult children who had never learned to be responsible. My father started volunteering there even after his required hours were finished. It took 18 months, but my parents paid back my college fund with interest, just as they had promised. They used money from the sale of some family heirlooms and a small inheritance my mother received from her aunt. Jake's restitution took longer. It took him 3 years to pay off the full $21,000 he owed me, but he never missed a payment. More importantly, he never asked my parents for help making those payments. He worked overtime, took side jobs, and lived in the cheapest apartment he could find. The community service requirement connected Jake with a youth mentoring program where he talked to teenagers about the consequences of reckless driving. He was good at it, probably because he had lived through those consequences himself. 2 years after the accident, Jake was promoted to crew supervisor at his construction job. He had saved enough money to rent a decent apartment and even bought himself a used car, which he insured properly and drove carefully. 3 years after the accident, my parents and I were having dinner together for the first time since the arrests. Jake joined us, looking healthy and confident in ways I had never seen before. "Liam," he said as we were cleaning up after dinner, "I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I'm grateful that you didn't bail me out. I'm grateful that you let me face consequences for what I did. It was the hardest thing that ever happened to me, but it was also the best thing. Why? Because for the first time in my life, I learned that I was capable of handling hard things. I learned that I could work hard and take care of myself and be someone that other people could depend on. I never would have learned that if you had just forgiven me and moved on like always happened before." My mother was crying again, but this time they were tears of pride instead of fear. "I'm proud of both of my sons," she said. "Liam, you were right to stand up to us. And Jake, you've become the man we always hoped you could be. We lost our way as parents, but we found our way back because you refused to let us stay lost. 4 years after the accident, I bought a new car with money I had saved from my improved financial situation. My credit had recovered completely, and I was making good money as a second-year resident. Jake came with me to the dealership and helped me negotiate the price. "You know," he said as we drove my new car home, "I never thought I'd be the kind of person who could help someone else make a smart financial decision. Why not? Because for so long, I was the kind of person who made terrible financial decisions and expected other people to clean them up. But working hard for 3 years to pay you back taught me how much money is really worth, how much sacrifice goes into earning it." Today, Jake manages his own construction crew, owns his home, and has a savings account, has been dating the same woman for 2 years, and she has no idea about his past unless he chooses to share it with her. My parents are retired and volunteer regularly at the homeless shelter. They still worry about Jake, but they worry in healthy ways, not enabling ways. As for me, I finished my residency and now work as an emergency room physician. Every day, I see families dealing with the consequences of reckless decisions. Sometimes I'm able to help them understand that love doesn't mean protecting someone from the consequences of their actions. Sometimes love means letting those consequences teach the lessons that need to be learned. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that you can love your family while still setting boundaries. You can be compassionate while still demanding accountability. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to discover their own strength by facing their own problems. My relationship with my family is stronger now than it has ever been, precisely because it's built on truth and mutual respect instead of enabling and denial. We had to lose each other for a while in order to find each other again, but it was worth it. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace in your family and standing up for what's right? Sometimes the hardest thing about loving someone is knowing when to stop protecting them from themselves. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about real people facing difficult choices and finding their way through them. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story, and I hope it reminds you that it's never too late for families to heal when they're willing to choose truth over comfort.